we jump into the oscillators, can we discuss what is a wavetable for the users out there that don't know what it is?
Sure. Yeah, a wavetable, it's a term that's been sort of loosely defined. There's sort of two conflicting viewpoints. There's one is if you're a programmer, a wavetable could be simply a single cycle of a waveform that's repeating. But most wavetable synths nowadays, when you talk about a wavetable synth, it's sort of explicitly that it's multiple single cycles that you can move between. So you're changing between multiple waveforms on a single oscillator.
Right. Show us how you can bring in your own sounds into Serum,
right,
and see the cycles and manipulate the cycles. And we're going to call those cycles frames.
Yeah, great. That's how I mentioned them in the manual. So here we have like this dub bass sample. You can hear it there, right? Mm-hmm. If we double click it, we can see it down below. And you can see that this waveform has this cyclical nature, or this sort of repeating pattern. Mm-hmm. And that's the bass frequency or fundamental of the sound. Mm-hmm. We can see there's about, about 20 cycles here.
But each repetition has its own variation, so it's slightly different than the repetition before.
Right, that's why this has some sort of motion to it. You can hear the sound change over time. It's not just a static waveform. So what we're going to do now is bring this sound into Serum, and just by simply dragging the file onto the oscillator that we want to have it end up on, you see these options appear. And these are different import modes for bringing in a sound.
And we'll discuss those when we go into the wavetable editor.
Right, so I'm just going to use this third one, pitch average, which is really the one you'll tend to start with if you're bringing in a sound that has a constant pitch to it. Mm-hmm. And so now, just like that, Serum has broken it into the multiple tables. I'm now in the wavetable editor, and we can see basically the same waveform that we see down here at the bottom, we see here in the thumbnails, but it's been sliced for us into these equal segments. And so you can see how across each one we have this sort of similar overall contour, which is the fundamental frequency. And then we have all of the stuff changing, of course, as well. So there's our 21 slices that make up this sound. Now we're able to essentially just sit on one if we wanted to, and we can hit a note and just hear that single repeating pattern, or we could set up Serum to animate between these various frames over time. So you can see I'm doing it there with the mouse, but we could then automatically do that with an LFO or an envelope by just assigning it to this WT pause.
Let's assign the LFO to that wavetable position, which is actually playing the different frames.
Right. We're going to go back over this later, but I'm just going to quickly morph this, and that's going to allow it to have a sort of in-between frames and sound smoother. So we can see it's going forwards and backwards across this. I'm just going to change this envelope to be like an upward saw there, which is just going to now just navigate us from the beginning to the end of the sound across whatever rate I set on my LFO.
Yeah.
I'm going to set the LFO to trigger so it syncs with the note start.
And just for us newbies, when the LFO's at the bottom here is going to play frame 0.
Right.
And at the very top, it'll play frame 22, whatever the last one is.
That's right, yeah. Since I created the morph between these tables, we actually have 256 tables now. You can see it goes from 1 to 256.
Nice, and that's the maximum amount of frames or cycles that you can have within a whole wavetable.
That's right, exactly. So down here at the bottom of the LFO, it would be an output of 0 of the LFO, and then up here at the top would be a maximum output of the LFO.
Perfect.
So hence, yes, we go from the beginning, or wherever the knob value is, to the maximum, or wherever this arc that we've set up for the modulation depth is allowing us to go to. So in this case, start to end.
Nice. I think that's a pretty straight-ahead explanation of what a wavetable is, and this is the type of engine that Serum has. Now, walk us through the other parameters of the oscillator.
Okay, yeah. So we have, first of all, this WT pause, this wavetable position. I'd consider that sort of the most fundamental knob to learn and understand, which is choosing which of these tables we're selecting to hear or modulating through. And then to the right of this, we have another way to manipulate the sound, which is called the warp knob. And there's an associated menu below the knob, which are the warp modes. And this gets a lot of fun. The warp modes allow you to manipulate the sound in real time and get interesting permutations of your waveform out. So let's start by using, say, this bend control. And so one thing I'm going to also take a little sidestep here and mention is that we have this 3D overview that allows us to see all of the various slices of the waveform or frames at once. And then there's this other view. If I click on it, it'll toggle between these two. And this other view allows us to see the single or current frame that we're hearing.
Nice.
And so the reason I'm switching to this mode is because this 2D view allows us to visualize these warp modes.
So that shows you what it's actually doing to that cycle, to that individual wave file.
Exactly. I'm going to bypass this modulator we assigned, so the LFO is no longer doing anything.
Okay.
And now what I can do is hit a note, and you'll hear that the sound is constant. And so that's essentially the source sound. And now if I move the bend knob, you can hear that the sound sort of changes. It feels like almost formants are shifting upwards as portions of this waveform are getting compressed and squashed together. It's making harmonics go higher in pitch in a sense. So
it's pinching and stretching the file, and each of those presets under the warp menu changes and stretches, pinches and stretches the file in unique ways. One of the ones that I really like is remap. Can you talk to us a little bit about why that's special within Serum?
Yeah, cool. I was building these other modes. They all, like you mentioned, behave a little bit differently. For instance, I'll just kind of navigate through the ASIM mode here, which pinches in a different way. You can notice the middle no longer anchors, and now it's actually stretching the entire waveform, which gives you a different sound. As I was doing these, I realized, well, maybe it would be fun if I could just sort of experiment without having to go into code to make these different modes, if I could just actually draw how the sound might manipulate in real time.
Did you pull it off?
Yes, I did. So that's the remap mode. I decided to leave it in and make it an actual feature.
Look, there's a magnifying glass. I didn't see that before.
Yeah, the magnifying glass appears when you've selected the remap mode. And then you can click it, and up comes this editor. This allows you to draw your own custom remapping of the sound. So really quick, I'll just give an overview of it. You basically have this graph here, and you can see as I move the graph, it's changing the waveform over on the right. I'm going to move the remap to 100% because this is influencing the depth between 0 and 100. Right now, you can see that it looks essentially the same because we have this diagonal line. So the remap essentially has no effect because this would be the default of any given input position is the same on the output position.
Right.
You can see if I change something over here on the left half, as I added that middle point, you can see that the left half of the waveform is also changing. Similarly, if I change something on the right half, you'll notice that the right half of the waveform is changing. And
you're not limited within this graph to just 2 points. You can click and draw as many points as you need, right?
Yeah, you can shift click for steps. You can kind of get a little bit crazy if you want with there's some presets, or you can save and add your own presets down here. So kind of sky's the limit in terms of how to manipulate stuff. And then this will set, like I mentioned, the depth between none and all. So you can automate or modulate this knob value to have the sound change over time.
Very cool. What are some other features under the warp that we want to point out? What about, well, there's like basic FM, FM from B, which means you can use oscillator B to move that waveform in whatever particular shape you have, right?
Yeah, the sort of benefit of using these FM modes is one special benefit would be that if you have some kind of detuning going on, you're able to get something that's evolving more out of time. With these remap modes and the other modes, we're really just permutating this one wave shape. And it will apply. We can still use the WT pause and still change this axis of the sound. So you can still get some interesting, a lot of different permutations out. But with FM, it can be cool because we can have some, either slight detuning or use a different octave and really have the sound change over time in some interesting ways. So it's pretty much standard FM like you get in any FM synthesizer, modulating the playback position or phase of this waveform. Listen, for example, what I've done here is I've just set up a sine wave on oscillator B, and I've turned its volume down, so we're not hearing that sine wave.
Right.
But it's still modulating over here. So as I raise this warp depth up and hold down a note, you'll listen and you'll hear the influence of this take effect.
Right, and because you're changing the frequency of oscillator B, you're hearing the rate of change, the effect of it being heard in oscillator A as well.
That's right, so you can get some sort of more complex, interesting timbres. And of course, there's no reason why we need to use a sine wave here. We could use a whole other wavetable or something like that and get some pretty interesting stuff happening where this could change over time. And we're not hearing this specific one, just using it as a modulator source.
Beautiful. So just to recap, the wavetable position allows you to select which frame that you're playing, and the warp mode allows you to alter the frame itself.
Yes.
Can we just go over some of the pitch functionalities within the oscillator and some of the other dials, including a little bit on unison?
Yeah, great. Along the top here, we have where we can select a wavetable. So there's these preset wavetables, or if you've imported sounds and saved them, they'll show up here. But here's all just the ones that come with Serum. Below this wavetable menu, we have this octave, semitones, and fine. And so these are just a way to set the coarse pitch of the oscillator. So we have octave, semi-fine, and then over here is a coarse which allows you to basically connect all three of those, but have a separate one. So this allows you to just navigate a wide range of pitch automatically. And so this is especially useful as a modulation destination. You might want some sort of laser zap sound that starts really high and dives down low.
Cool.
Yeah, so that's what that's good for. So that's the top half here. We have this waveform area. We mentioned 2D, 3D. And then below here we have our unison controls, which we should go over more in depth later because they get more advanced with the advanced unison stuff. But
just for those of you that may not know, basically you're asking a single note trigger to fire multiple instances of that oscillator, and then you can also change the tuning of each individual.
That's right. Yeah, I think about it as if you hold down one note, it's sort of playing multiple copies of that same note as if you had 5 keyboards stacked or whatnot.
Exactly.
And without any detuning, they're so stacked perfectly on top of each other that you're not going to really hear that there's 5 of them. It's just going to sound like one loud one in a sense. So it's nice to have the multiple ones to be out of tune. So this detuning, as you can see visually, is spreading them left to right there, which is just representing pitch being lower or higher. And then we have this blend control, which is allowing to set our blend between the center or perfectly in pitch original oscillator, and then these copies can be louder or quieter.
Nice. Pull up just a very quick sawtooth wave so they can hear the effect of unison and detuning.
Right, so here we have a knit on the editor, back to a saw, and now.
And a lot of you will recognize that classic type of tone.
Yeah, so the blend is nice to be able to sort of get that depth of how much you want, the detune, and then you can get really advanced over here on the global tab with unison features that we'll go over at a later point.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's it for the overview of the Wavetable oscillator.
Awesome. I love it. Great job, Steve.